Hello there. I'm Reverend Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram and the author of the Enneagram of the Soul, a 40-day spiritual companion for the 9 types. If you've been yearning for a compassionate path of awakening into a greater sense of wholeness, oneness, and unity, you are certainly in the right place. This is where contemplation meets the Enneagram. So today we're continuing our 12-week Sunday Talk series centered on the theme, The House of Three Instinctual Rooms. We've been hanging out for a few weeks now in the room of shelter, the stone room on the ground floor of this metaphoric house. And today we step out into the next room, which is known as the Great Hall, the room of belonging. So today's talk is titled The Room of Belonging, Reading the Relational Field. I'll take today in 3 parts. First, we'll orient ourselves within this vast and windowed room filled with chairs and tables, the room of belonging. Then we'll explore specifically the first zone in this room, named by Russ Hudson, the zone of interpreting. This is where empathy, attunement, adaptation live. And then third, we'll move into what integration might look like as we bring presence to our attention in this room and look at the 2 poles of attention, whether this zone in this room is neglected for you or whether it might be like a hyper focus. So we'll look at both of those. So with that, let's begin. Part 1, entering the room of belonging. So in recent weeks, we spent time in the room of shelter, right? On the ground floor of the house. The room the room of shelter is largely about me, right? Not in necessarily a narcissistic way, it could be, but just even in a healthy way. This is about me, my physical well-being, my energy and resources, and the basic care that helps life to continue, right? So in the room of shelter, we explored the instinctual cluster of drives that secure the safety and well-being of the body, guide how we manage resources, and support the building of a home sweet home. This is the quiet, like essential driving force that ensures that like life as we know it continues, is sustainable. So this ground floor matters and in fact is foundational to our lives. Everything else depends on this, right? It depends on you actually being alive, right? And yet, as we know, human life is not lived alone, right? Those familiar with the room of belonging know this instinctively. Here, our attention naturally moves outward toward people, relationships, the relational field, our shared lives. So the room of belonging corresponds to what's traditionally called the social instinct. And despite the name, though, this instinct is not about being outgoing. It's not about popularity necessarily, or groupiness, or even like social confidence. In fact, depending on your Enneagram type, this may be the room where you feel like the most self-conscious or awkward or unsure, even if it's a room that you dwell in a lot. So at its heart, the room of belonging, to be clear, is not about being social. It's about relatedness, attention to our relatedness. It's the instinctual drive to be in relationship, to maintain emotional contact with others, friends, partners, family, community. This drive supports our need for intimacy. And I want to emphasize here that I think Russ and other teachers like John Lukovich uh, teach that like intimacy has been inappropriately ascribed to the sexual instinct, which we'll address in the room of spark. Um, and yes, the word is broad, and we often we might talk about like uh, actual sexual intimacy in that room. But here we're talking about like emotional connection, like what I might consider more like authentic intimacy, right? Like a deepening of relationship. So this is about our need for intimacy, for giving and receiving care, attention, responsiveness, and yes, as the name says, suggests, it is also about belonging, like not necessarily assuming that you do belong, but it's actually looking for, interested in belonging. It's about attention to finding your place, discerning where you fit, where you participate, collaborate, share in identity. And by that I might mean like affiliation. Like you might be affiliated with a certain sports team from a city, whether it's like a political party, a nationality or ethnicity, right? Identities that are shared. So this room opens us to a new order of living. It's not just, am I alive? But what does my life mean in relationship to others? So the social instinct carries an orientation toward vocation, contribution, service. Something in us wants our life to matter beyond our immediate preservation and concerns. And notably, from birth, our nervous systems are shaped in connection, right? We come to know ourselves because someone, like usually the parent figure, sees us, responds to us. This is relational, cares for us. So relatedness isn't optional or added on, right? Though it can feel like for some of you, it's actually foundational to being human. As the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, we enter are, like we are born in a field of relatedness. Because of this, our bodies and psyches are exquisitely sensitive to other people. We influence one another constantly, regulating, soothing, activating, shaping one another, often without a word being spoken. This is the relational field, the subtle, ongoing web of connection that we are sensing all the time. Some of us more attuned to it than others, as we'll see. So, again, within each instinctual room, Russ Hudson describes three zones. And so this is where I'm drawing it from. If you're seeing this video as the first in the series, know that this work is based on the work of Russ Hudson. In the room of belonging, the three zones he names are the zone of interpreting, the zone of connecting, and the zone of participation. So today we begin with the first, the zone of interpreting. With that, let's move into part two. Part two, the zone of interpreting. I was thinking this morning, like as I was like contemplating what to say for this, I was like, imagine a world full of people without any ability to read or understand one another, right? I mean, we almost take this for granted that I have sounds coming out of my mouth and then you receive it and there's something hopefully coherent and you're interpreting these guttural whatever noises my body is making, and you're like reading and making sense of it. This is like wild that this happens. Anyway, that's what I was thinking this morning. So sounds kind of coming out of our mouths, bodies moving, like you have a sense of like this, if you're watching the video, it's like body language. So we are doing physical things, emitting sounds, and somehow we're interpreting and reading each other, trying to make sense of that. And arguably for some of us not, right? But life would be chaotic. In fact, I'm remembering in the Bible, the Tower of Babel, right? That like the worst thing ever is like suddenly people are all speaking in these different languages and nobody's understanding each other. And this is chaos in the world, right? Like without this ability, this instinctual like tendency to be able to interpret, life would be chaotic like that. Connection would be impossible. So it's like mind blown, right? But so before we even connect, before we participate, the later zones, before we offer ourselves or respond, something else has to happen. We need to interpret things. We need to be able to read the relational field. And I was thinking, in the room of shelter, we interpret what we need through tangible cues like, oh, my stomach's growling, I'm hungry, I need food, right? Hot, cold, hunger, fatigue, comfort and strain. The body tells us what's needed, and those who are strong in that room have a radar for that, are more attuned to that. I don't tend to be, right? In the room of belonging, the signals are different. They come from people, other people, and they might be subtle or not. Some gestures are not so subtle, but those who are strong in this interpretive like zone, interpretation zone, can tend to read the more subtle cues that others who are low in this zone miss. So it's like a glance, a pause, a shift in tone where something is implied rather than directly spoken. So Russ names 5 capacities in this zone. He calls them categories. We'll take each in turn, and rather than treating what follows as, skills to master or shame yourself over, I invite you to simply notice them as lived capacities, ways your attention naturally moves or doesn't. And so again, we're talking about how simply bringing presence to the way our consciousness orients can actually begin to transform how it orients and then give us capacities for choosing differently, not out of any external sense of should or should not, but really out of our own inner sense of like, I'm called to develop this area of life. So with that, taking each in turn, we'll begin with category 1, reading people. We become attentive to verbal and nonverbal communication, tone, facial expressions, posture, pacing, energy. Often this happens instantly. It's not like an analysis after the fact because these are instinctual. We just kind of sense it, right? We walk into a room, something in us already knows whether something's like off or, are people sad? Are people giddy? Uh, so I invite you to reflect, does this way of noticing people feel familiar or distant to you? Reading people. Second, reading between the lines. So here we sense what is implied or unspoken, emotional subtext, pauses, mismatches between words and tone. So someone says, I'm fine, and something in us knows there's more going on. So I invite you to reflect. How easily do you sense what's unspoken? 3, attunement. This is our ability to sense emotional atmosphere, the mood of a room, the relational temperature between people. We naturally adjust our tone, pacing, and presence. And so there is this, so it's not just we're attuning to them, we're actually having capacity. Like, let's say you're all like excited and you walk into a room and something has happened and everyone is grieving. There's a tragedy, right? Like when we're attuned, suddenly our system slows down to that, right? Responds to what's happening. There is adaptation in that, right? But some people who are low in this might feel like, oh, whoa, there's this like not in integrity. I'm going to authentically be my exuberant self. But you see how like we're in relationships. And so there's this balance of what is it to be in integrity, but yet attune to the emotional atmosphere around me. And I think that answer can only be individually answered by each of us. 4, and you can tell all of these are interrelated categories. 4 is empathy. Empathy allows us to feel with others, to resonate emotionally. Here's so much heart in this, right? It requires us being connected to our hearts. To resonate emotionally through listening and presence. And here, empathy is contact. It's not fixing, right? It's being connected, attuned with, caring for, right? So the reflection is, oh, did I ask the reflection earlier? Okay, the other one, in case I didn't, how aware are you of the emotional atmosphere was for the last one. And then for this one, how naturally does empathy arise for you? So just notice, like again, whether you're attuned, if you tend to be, if you identify as social blind or blind in the room of belonging, this might be like you might feel some tightening around even your not noticing of this and maybe some of the struggles that has caused you throughout your life in your relationships. And then 5, adaptation. This is our ability to move fluidly across social contexts, roles, relationships, cultures. In its healthy form, it's very responsive and alive. So I invite you to reflect, where does adaptation feel fluid for me? And where does it feel effortful? Is that a word? Effortful. So as you can see, like I've kind of, all of these are kind of mushed in together. They, again, interrelatedness, which is so appropriate for this topic, the relationality of all these. And I want to say also that as we were talking about the room of shelter, those other qualities are the most concrete and practical, so that in some ways they're the easiest to explain, not necessarily for some of us the easiest to do. But as we get into this territory of the social, and then even harder for some, the room of spark, like it becomes harder to explain. It's not as tangible, right? So, so just noticing that these are kind of like less concrete, but yet as part of our human instinctual life, we notice. And yeah, again, some of us more than others. And that leads me to our final section, part 3, the poles of interpreting. So, for many of us, this zone of interpreting has been active long before conscious choice entered the picture. It's not like we decide, like, I'm going to read what this person is saying, right? We just do it. So, we learned early, sometimes very early, how to read people, sense the atmosphere, adjust to stay connected. But as with every room in the house, this zone can quietly lose its grounding. When fear enters the relational field, fear and insecurity, it's not so much fear, it could be fear of survival, but fear of like disconnection is the greater fear within this zone. Fear of misattunement, fear of losing our place with others. And when that gets hyper, like becomes a hyper focus, just natural ease of interpreting begins to shift, not all at once, often very subtly. but it shifts from just this presence and this skillful reading to a kind of like self-consciousness. It goes from sensing this relational field to like tracking ourselves within it, so that interpreting becomes overly like self-referencing. Empathy becomes like over identification. Adaptation can become a blending where we abandon ourselves in order to belong or feel like we belong. We begin to edit ourselves. Um, we withhold a truth, we soften an edge, we shape our presence around how something might be received for fear that we will be exiled, disconnected, and thus cast out into the wild almost. I mean, if we want to go back to the roots of this. So, but the immediate feeling is the relational cost is too great. And so the impulse is to strive to conform to what the room or the relational context seems to be calling for. So we have some of that. Yeah. And then interpreting specifically, I want to talk about in this field becomes, can become like like monitoring, right? So it becomes a little, it's edgy. And so for some of you, interpreting others, reading cues, sensing atmosphere may feel distant or unclear. In other words, you might be like, Nhien, I'm oblivious to this kind of thing. There's so much I miss, and it is uncomfortable or embarrassing. I want to say that my own bias, I just want to admit, again, I'm kind of being very open about my relationship. I used to just think that certain people were just uncaring because I was like, how do they not notice? Why are they just pushing their agenda here when they don't see what is going on? And I realized like, oh, do they not see what's going on? And I realized they don't see. Some people don't actually see what's going on. And that was so illuminating for me to be like, oh. So when someone's social blind and now like I know if this is like their room, I'm get a little bit more compassion and space. Whereas before I just thought it was like an intentional like self-centeredness. And then now, I mean, I never know what it actually is, but now I at least ask and check in and going, maybe they don't actually see that this just happened. Maybe they're not reading the room. That just for me, as someone who I realize I'm very, very strong. I mean, I feel like right now, social's in competition almost with my sexual, but this piece, this zone, I mean, I've talked for several weeks now about all the zones I suck at, like oblivious to. Interpreting, I feel like is probably like one of my strongest qualities, like sensing what is going on in any group of mine, sensing what someone's trying to say and even being able to help them draw it out because I can read even before they like have identified what they mean, like strong suit for me. And I realized that as a result, I just assumed everyone could see the things that I could see. And so now understanding like blindness in this area has actually given me great compassion for, okay, I just need to be a little bit more explicit or explain what's going on. And again, counter my own confusion because um it feels like, well, can't you just say it just happened? It was so obvious. And then I realized, no, it's not obvious. It can actually be so much more subtle than I realize because I happen to be strong in this area, right? So if your attention, though, isn't, if it naturally turns inward or toward your focus interest rather than toward the relational field. So the invitation here isn't to become like super self-conscious and like socially vigilant or even to give up your autonomy, but it's an invitation to consider what you might be missing out on, you know, and maybe to stay present and be a tune in just a little bit longer, a little bit more than you have before. Again, not as a should, but if you're feeling the lack and the missing of that, notice one small relational signal, a cue of like, oh, a difference between I'm smiling, but I'm telling you something really sad, and to be curious what's going on for that person. And not at all an invitation to like suddenly abandon who you are to like suddenly become a social being, right? Just taking a baby step to consider what aspects of life might you be missing that's actually happening in your life. Like, right? Because we are born into a relational field. Even if we live as a hermit, which some of you I know try to, but even that choice is a choice in relationship to other people. It's a decision to pull away from other people and live separately, right? Or at least try to. And so, on the other hand, the other side of the pole, for others, the zone of interpreting is very, very active. And you naturally track tone and mood and how others are responding and tracking yourself sometimes even when you're with them. And again, the sensitivity developed because relationship, just as a default, matters deeply to you. And the invitation here isn't to stop interpreting. It's a great skill, but it's to notice when you're using this interpreting skill in a way that abandons your truth, your soul. Or honestly, for some of us, um, to control other people. So it's like understanding that field, we can have a lot of power over others. But that's also a way I believe that we abandon our true essence and soul. Like we're not leaning in because it's the ego that needs to control or manage someone else, right? And so we could do either over a two when this pole is high, it can either look something like I'm overly adjusting. Now I can read the room and I'm going to make it seem like I fit in with what's going on here. Or I can read the room and I can try to push it to like my agenda. And these are ways that we can be imbalanced in this interpreting zone. So, so in closing, I hope you can really sense the gift of this room and this zone in particular, right? Otherwise, it's babble. And there's an inability for connection and participation, for community, for shared living to happen. And arguably, like some of the biggest issues in our society today relate to misunderstanding, reading other people's cues based on our culture or our language. Even as I record this today, I'm doing it a couple weeks early because I'm headed to Egypt tonight. And I'm thinking about this understanding that I just want to stay open to, even boundaries around hugging. I remember my first time in Egypt that one of the fellow Enneagram professionals there, I'm so glad I asked, like, if he hugs, he was like, not women he's not married to until like they're close to him, and if I didn't know that, like if I'm interpreting it through an American Western lens, I was like, oh my God, he must not like me, kind of, just being aware of how important interpretation is and adaptation and adjustment and how that all relates together and just staying open. And so in Evolving Enneagram, we often talk about compassionate curiosity. I think this is doubly important now as we enter this relational field, bringing that compassionate curiosity to your own being and also to how someone else is showing up, and maybe giving each other the benefit of the doubt, even just a little bit more. So in closing, I want to offer this benediction. May you be gentle with yourself. Forgive yourself for moments of misreading, moments of self-abandonment or self-editing. And may you be gentle with others. May you forgive others for the ways they have misunderstood you, intentionally or otherwise. May you rest from managing belonging or feeling like you will never get to belong, and even in this room, may you know that this great hall is not foreign but lives already inside of you, and you belong to this room. And may your authentic presence in this room be enough. Namaste.